Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Dave coming from the Devil and Pastor Dave Show. Yes, I am a pastor. Here is my certificate of ordination. I spent a whole $32, and that made me a pastor. And that seems to be about all you need to have the authority to be a pastor. In fact, I think my training was better than most pastors, but I know that's probably blasphemous. Outrageous. Well, anyway, I'm here to talk about sex and religion. And that seems like a touchy subject. I guess that sounded like a pun, but that was not right. Anyway, it is sort of insincere to think that somehow religion is going to give you clarity about sex. It's not. And when I say religion, I'm talking Judeo-Christian religion. And that tradition is enough to at least point out my discussion. In modern times, Christians especially, do not want people, especially their followers, but they look down their nose at anyone who engages in masturbation, premarital sex, uses birth control, or agrees with abortion or the idea of abortion. So those four main topics, those that oppose those things think they are standing on some kind of religious moral authority. And I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. That is just not true. There is no moral standing, no religious authority standing about any of those four topics. The things that they tell us not to do, they come from no place. They are just assumptions that they make. I assure you, there is not one single passage forbidding masturbation. There's no commandment, thou shalt not give thyself pleasure. No such thing. It does not exist. If they say it does, make them point it out. They will not find it. Doesn't say, doesn't exist. They make an assumption about the sanctity of sex, as if it's only something that should happen in marriage. And only between a man and a woman. That's their whole idea of sex. It's pathetic. It certainly doesn't answer a lot of questions you might have about sex. So don't go to the Bible for any kind of understanding about your sexual nature. You're not going to find anything. So, by all means, play with yourself. The Bible does not forbid it. God has not commanded that you not touch yourself. It's not there. And they are lying if they say it is. Because they're good at making these assumptions. So they're always leaping. And they'll give you some obscure passage which doesn't have any meaning. And what's worse is has several meanings. And it will somehow, they'll say, yes, this is what it means. You can't masturbate. It's not true. It really is not true. You don't have to believe me. You go look for yourself. Because they do not have any moral standing to forbid that. Another thing that they will insist is that you cannot have premarital sex. It's not true. There is no commandment. Thou shalt not pleasure thyself or anyone else before marriage. No such thing. Does not exist. The only thing that, they'll make an assumption is the word defile. You can't defile. Whatever defile means, and it means a lot of things. You can defile anything. You can defile your desk, your farm, your farm animals. You can defile just about anything, and it has nothing to do with sex. Somehow you make it unclean, whatever that means. And it's like unclean, okay. So, maybe they're suggesting that you be careful about sex. No, that's not what they're really saying. So, but they do not say that you can't have premarital sex. And the sex is all about what the man is to do. These are commandments about how man should conduct themselves. And so the big three, they don't want any men to take the neighbor's wife for sex. Not because it's something that's offensive to the woman or whatever. It's just that you're taking your neighbor's property, essentially. So the whole thing is about getting men to act better in the sense that they're not going to violate their neighbor's property. I know they call it wife, but really you could even say it's more of a master-slave relationship or an owner-property kind of relationship. And that's really what it is. So it's really offensive because you're essentially taking your neighbor's property. That's not good. So that's really the whole upshot about adultery. And of course, the other forbidden thing is the notion of bestiality. And I know when they were writing this, they must have been thinking of the shepherds and say, hey, you, with the staff, back away from that sheep, please. Pull up your self. Then they have pants, so what would they say? Put your robe down. That's what they say. So they obviously were checking out the shepherds, saying, okay, we can't have them having sex with animals. Not because that was such a horrible sexual experience, but because if you're spending your time having sex with animals, then, animals are not going to produce a child. So they don't like you putting your seed in things other than a woman so that she can produce a child. And that's what women were for. Just make children. And it was very important because, the kingdom of David was rather small compared to all the kingdoms around him, Egypt, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Greeks, all the scary. They were this tiny little thing in the middle of a desert, essentially. And it's like, oh, man, we really got to focus. Gentlemen, men, please, in order for us to be a viable empire, we have to focus. Keep impregnating women. I can imagine some we'll say scribe, someone who was educated, he goes to King David and, the scribe is talking about the size of David's empire and he was a little concerned. He says, well, the men are not really having enough sex with their wives because, well, you took all the wives. Like, I don't know, between King David and Solomon, they had thousands of wives. So it's like, the scribe is brave enough to approach David and suggest, well, maybe, if you didn't marry all those women, maybe you could have had some of the women for the men. Remember, this was a pretty tiny kingdom. So if someone had 1,000 wives, that means 1,000 men didn't have wives. And so maybe they, for their own gratification, turned to other men for their satisfaction. And the scribe was like, well, yeah, there aren't enough wives around here. So, and of course, David would take offense, and then he would declare, there shall be no homosexuality. Man shall not lay with a man. Not because it was against God, not because of whatever, because he wanted people in his empire. And if men were screwing around with other men, they aren't producing babies, so let's get down with it. I don't think David would ever have given up his wives, or Solomon for that matter. So, that would never have happened. But that's kind of my sense about why such a prohibition or commandment would have been made. Not because it was just so abhorrent. I'm sure David had sex with men all the time. Blasphemy! But I don't doubt it. He was pretty free. And I really think it was more about the size of the kingdom. We need to populate this kingdom here if we're going to survive in this environment here. So, make babies. Sounds like a good rule, right? Except it had this, implication in the future that we don't need babies. We have plenty of babies. So, have sex with whatever you want. Because that's really the restriction, at least in my opinion. All right, so the big three, right? You can't have your neighbor's wife because you're taking his property. You can't have sex with an animal because you can't produce children. You can't have sex with another man because you can't produce children. So that's really the whole focal point on those prohibitions. The idea that you can't have birth control, that just doesn't exist. There's nothing in the Bible that forbids a woman from using birth control so she doesn't get pregnant. Now, you could see why maybe they would think that, because after all, Israel was such a tiny kingdom that they needed babies born. So if they wanted women to not have babies but just enjoy sex, make babies for the kingdom. That's all they wanted. But there is no restriction. There's nothing that specifically says thou shalt not use birth control. Nothing. There's this one story, some guy named Onan. He was directed by God to impregnate his wife or his maidservant. See, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, he really doesn't want to have a baby. So he pulls out just at ejaculation. So he just spreads his seed, if you will, on the ground instead of inside the woman. And that supposedly infuriates God. And it's only because God was that Onan had disobeyed God. That's all. So you do what I tell you. It is not to be taken as a commandment that you should never engage in the use of birth control. That's not what that said. Now they'll try to say that it is, but it's not. It's more about disobedience. And you know God, this God, the Old Testament God, he hates it when you disobey him. You'll probably die. And I don't know the story well enough to know, but I don't think Onan lasted very long. I don't know if they did any follow-up, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was just drawn and quartered and tossed in some shepherd's field, and they found the next day by the sheep. So anyway, that story is not about birth control. It's a lie. And then the last thing is about abortion. There's absolutely nothing in the Bible that says that abortion is a sin, or that there's no commandment forbidding the act of abortion. In fact, it seems to be the opposite, because there is a procedure in the Old Testament, Numbers 5:11 through 31, that describes in very specific detail how, if a husband suspects his wife cheating on him, that they can go to a priest, and this priest will go through this procedure to determine if she's been faithful or not. And the process, well, believe it or not, she ends up drinking this concoction of water, and plus whatever, things are just swept into from the tabernacle floor. So, a couple dust bunnies and a little pile of dust and dirt. Anyway, that's mixed in the water, and the woman is made to drink it. Now, I don't know what that would do you. I mean, who knows what's on that floor, but it's pretty disgusting. So she drinks it, and, she has to agree that, whatever happens, hey. And if she knows she's guilt-free, then nothing should happen. So there are two possibilities that could happen. One, the woman's belly will swell. That would be an indication she's an adulteress. Or, if she happens to be carrying a baby, that baby will miscarry. So they'll abort the baby. That's essentially what's happening. If she happens to be pregnant and that is from the baby is from another man, and only God, of course, would know this, then he'll abort the baby. Kill. Miscarry. No baby. And they'll argue, well, that's just the natural. No, that's not true. This is not a natural. This is one where God deliberately decides to abort the baby. Because he knows that the woman was unfaithful, right? Because God knows everything. Why you have to go through this little procedure, but you do. So God would not pay attention to this woman if the husband never brought his wife to the priest to perform this procedure. At least that's what we're led to believe. Not only that, he has to bring like 2 pounds of barley or something. Flour. You know. I don't know why. They stick their hands in it. You know, he prays. He does something weird about it. But anyway, that's the whole thing, right? Her belly swells. She's guilty. If she has a miscarriage, she's guilty. So God can perform an abortion as proof that the woman is guilty. By the way, if the woman is found guilty, she's put to death. Now, there's a third possibility that's, kind of interesting. It's possible that nothing happens to her. Her belly doesn't swell. She doesn't miscarry. But if she is lying, God can disfigure her uterus, make it malfunction so that she never has children again. So therefore, if she goes home and the husband thinks, oh, okay, so far so good, then he has to have sex with her like every day for 30 days to see if she gets pregnant. And if she doesn't get pregnant, then that means she's unable to have children, even though it's possible that he could have a low sperm count or something. But whatever. If it is decided and if it's found out that 30 days of sex did not produce a child, boom, she dies. Because that would be the third proof or the third indicator that she in fact did cheat on her husband. This is how the religion treats these things. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't understand physiology. They don't understand biology. They don't understand female reproduction. They don't get anything. But they make all these ridiculous assumptions. And they have no problem with abortion. If God so dictates that you won't have children, then you won't have children. But there's a specific procedure, and it can result in an abortion. So it is a lie, and they'll say, no, this is really about jealousy. Oh, brother. It's not. Read it yourself. Again, don't take my word for it. So the 4 main things that modern Christians don't want anyone to do is masturbate, have premarital sex, use birth control, and perform or have abortions performed if they want. All those are big 4 topics, right? You'd agree that's kind of the kind of things that they don't want their young devotees to do, and they judge others who do these things, even though they have absolutely no religious authority to do these. There's nothing supporting their claim that you cannot masturbate. There's nothing supporting their claim that you can't have premarital sex. It just doesn't exist. There's nothing that says you can't use birth control. And of course, there's nothing that says you can't have an abortion. Because that's not the emphasis. They want men to impregnate women, and they'd rather have the men have their own women, their own property, so they can impregnate, so they can build the size of the population of the empire. That's what it was all about. Nothing to do with sex. Nothing to do with understanding what you are. It is just offensive for you to have sex with an animal because you're not producing children. It's also offensive to have sex with another man if you're a man because it doesn't produce children. And it doesn't help the kingdom of David grow because they were just a puny little kingdom. And all these stupid ideas were all about that. How do we build the kingdom? How do we compete with the Phoenicians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians? How do we compete with these guys? We need more babies. Anyway, that's the religious perspective, and compare it to modern perspective, they just don't line up. And there is nothing in the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Judeo-Christian Bible. Again, I don't know enough about the Quran or the Hindu sacred texts or any of that. I don't know. But my guess is their ideas of sex probably weren't much better. But I don't know that. So maybe there is one that actually talks about sex and the beauty of it. There is actually, I shouldn't rule out one thing that Solomon, in one of his Songs of Solomon, tries to describe the physical beauty of the woman he loves, supposedly. And it's very descriptive, except when it gets down to the genitalia. They cannot bring themselves to translate this into, modern, or at least some understanding or some description of a woman's genitals. They decide, they cop out, and they end up describing the navel as if that's going to give enough erotic desire. I mean, maybe some people might be into belly buttons. Okay, that's fine. But surely if you're a man and you love a woman, that it is the reproductive region, the genitalia, the vulva, the labia, the clitoris, the vagina, all that becomes very exciting. Because if a woman invites you in, it's very pleasant. But the Bible's not talking about that. They don't care about pleasure. They don't care about anything like that. It's all about making babies. That's the truth. You don't have to take my word for it. All right. You have homework if you want. Don't go to the Bible. This is just the lesson. Don't go to the Bible if you want to come to an understanding of sex. It does not exist. There's nothing in there. It is strictly about populating the kingdom of David. All right. Bye, folks. Send comments if you want. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.